This presentation is brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization with a focus on poverty, education, and mental health.
Who all in the class is working? Actually have a job.
About to start.
Okay, so about a third of the class. The people not working is because of like you got a hectic school schedule, or what's the reason for not working right now? Or just can't find a job, or or just don't want a job right now? Yeah. Oh, you said you don't want a job right now? Because of sports?
Supposed to be nice.
Some of us have to work 40 hours a week. Can't do it.
I want him at 13. Alright.
All right, we're gonna browse through some of the stuff we weren't able to get to in class. But the need for psychological science, we need psychology in order to obtain certain facts about things, about the world, using critical thinking. You guys will experience something like everyone else called hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is basically, I knew it all along about an event that occurred. Now you get time to reflect, right? And so in your mind, you process, like, hey, I knew how that was going to be anyway, which is typically not true. You didn't know how it was going to be anyway. And now you get time to reflect, you will come up with different judgments about certain events or circumstances that happen in life, right? So that's hindsight bias. Overconfidence is to deal with the ego. Overconfidence deals with, hey, I knew that. I know that already. This is common sense, right? This is logic. Typically, many people don't know much about large breadth of information. Maybe great in their specific field, but nothing more than that. Perceiving patterns in random events, making sense of everything, organizing things out of chaos, right? Creating order out of chaos is what our minds tend to do. So we have a traumatic event, something we can't control, we will try to rationalize so that we can make some sense of it and deal with it. Oftentimes we call these things mechanisms. Coping mechanism, defense mechanism. Right? You'll feel a certain way about things in order to cope, to move on with life. So, defensive, emotional. And I want to be very emotional and defensive about a particular thing because I don't want to have to address something, address trauma of some kind. So the scientific inquiry can help us sift through reality and overestimating intuition. Because we all have natural intuition, but sometimes we may feel more confident about it than we do. Psychological science in a post-truth world. We live in a world of what was described before as the age of information. You know, you guys are the generation that did not have technology. That's always lived through technology. Whereas I experienced a little bit of not having it as much. So you have access to information instantaneously But the problem is there's so much information that we really can't discern what is true from fake. Right? So misinformation, disinformation, those are the challenges, right? We look up one thing and say, hey, you heard this? You heard what's his name did that? Or you heard this is true, I read it off this. If you don't check multiple sources, then you can find out a lot of things are not true. Right? But we just take quick information, use and talk about it. So yeah, fake news, intentionally provided misinformation, repetition, repeat the statement. If you repeat a lie enough, people will start to believe it's true, right? Politicians do this all the time. You say something that, hey, I'm the greatest of all time. If you say I'm the greatest of all time, eventually a significant number of people will believe you're the greatest of all time. That's just a natural phenomenon. Right? I'm the GOAT. He's the GOAT. She's the GOAT in this. He's the GOAT in that. You're like, what are we trying to get with this? But if you repeat it enough, you'll convince and influence a lot more people that you are, which could be not true, but people will believe it. Group identity and echo chamber for the like-minded. When we talk in-group, out-group, people you associate with for whatever reason, you think that's part of your group. If they repeat it enough, when you hear from them, you're going to take it as fact. Because you can't believe others. You can't believe the out-group. The out-group are liars because they're not part of your group. Right, cognitive dissonance. You guys ever heard that term, cognitive dissonance? Anybody? No one's heard of cognitive dissonance? Right, it's kind of a refusal to believe something, even if you're presented with facts. Because your brain can accept that your belief may be flawed or untrue. We're typically just going to believe it regardless of the facts. So you're going to be biased on your belief in anything. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be religion or anything, but this has to be everyday world views. So this is a representation of sort of morality in social networks. This was a study done, and this is just sort of a representation of a graph, right? It shows how, let's say, we'll call it red pill, blue pill, right? Red pill will be kind of bad, good pill will be good and true, red pill is lies and everything else here. And you can see that there's some overlap, right? So a little bit of blue here. Right? So some positive, some people come over to believe the fake things or change their own morality based on certain views. You don't really see any red at all here. Which means that you tend to have negative views. Very difficult to believe something that's positive. Whereas if you have positive, you can tend to be more conflated to accept negative views. But if you look at the graph, it's actually more positive than negative. And that tends to just go in our mind frame. Are we positive people, or are we negative? In any sense, right? Negative people tend to just want to believe in negative things. Just for the sake of it. That's just how their mind frame is. That's their group. Now, last class about scientific method, how we use it. Theory. Anybody can define what a theory is? Right? Theory of relativity, right? In physics. gravitational theory, all these different theories. What is a theory? In plain words.
An assumption?
Yeah, it could be an assumption, but let's just say something that's just sort of accepted by the majority, right? Theoretically, right? Let's say the force of gravity. You know, if we jump out this building, we will fall and hit the ground. We may not truly understand how it all works, right? We may describe it as a force, or something else, or the shape of the universe and how it all affects it. So it's an accepted theory that gravity exists, right? It exists. Majority. Flat Earth versus a oval-shaped Earth, right? The majority of the world believe it's oval, but you may get some people who say, no, it's flat. Hypothesis, I think, is more of an assumption, right? You say, hey, I think the outcome of this is this. I think the effect of this is the cause of this, cause and effect. And then you test, and you figure out where you correct or incorrect. Operational definition, that's just defining terms, specifically to say exactly what you think something is, called definition. Replicate, can studies be replicated and use the same exact methods over and over and over. Meta-analysis, no need to learn that, let's do advanced. But case study, do we know what a case study is? Case study is typically just looking at, let's say in psychology, for clinical, it's looking at one person. We observe one person to see what are their issues, what are their disorders, how do they behave, why they behave the way they behave. So when we take one subject, one person, one example, let's study it. That's a case study. Naturalistic observation is just going out into nature and observing either people or animals. There's animal psychology, where researchers go out and just observe like primates, see why they do the things they do, and try to make it relative to studying human behavior as well too. In surveys, just asking questions, most likely, least likely, those sorts of things. Answer. We can skip that. That's trying to talk about the same stuff. Case studies, natural observations. So here's some data about tweets on Twitter. And it goes from Sunday to Thursday, Monday, Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, from midnight to midnight. And we can see here that positive tweets from people, where people tend to tweet positive things, right? Here, positive tweets were higher late Saturday night. And so we can make some assumptions that, well, why would people tweet more positive things late Saturday night than any other day of the week? Could we make some assumptions? Is there a difference between Saturday or Saturday evening, Saturday night, between any other day or time of day?
Well, typically people aren't working, they're more relaxed, less stressed.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sunday is kind of a day of rest for most people, right? So they'll just be in a mode of saying, hey, I don't have anything to do tomorrow, but I just probably enjoy family or going out or eating dinner Saturday night. So people are in a more positive mood, right? Their mood is, whereas opposed to other days of the week, You could say that other days of the week, a lot more going on, a lot more things happening. People are working, people are dealing with traffic, people are dealing with all types of things. Odds of tweets were lowest on Tuesday afternoon. Why would that be? What's the deal with Tuesday afternoon? Let's just say Monday was hectic, right? Monday is always a hectic day. So the following day, you're kind of still dealing with the things you dealt with Monday, through Monday night. So these are just examples of how you can examine anything, and it can become research. Like, I'm just going to examine tweets from, Sunday through Saturday. And the data is already out there. You can look at the data on Twitter, gather the information, do this, and like, hey, there's some interesting stuff out there. So also going out to nature, this particular psychologist used electronically activated recorders to sample natural occurring slices of daily life. So basically just listening out there to what's going on out there in the world, and using that information and going back over recordings to figure out what are some of the phenomena happening, which is basically almost like people watching, right? Anyone here like to just people watch? Like go to your cafe, get some coffee, and just watch people? Or not on purpose, but you just find yourself always just observing people, right? You see two people talking, you're trying to figure out what they're talking about, if they're angry, if they're fighting, things like that. We talked a little bit about surveys and interviews, and also they kind of goes to the research participation part of this class on the syllabus. You guys all familiar with that? Part of the class that you have to participate in some research. There's another option to do if you're not able to, but the school really likes students to participate in research as part of the progression. So yeah, so it could be possibly a survey, it could be an interview, and you just ask people to self-report. Well, they're gonna ask you to self-report. Correlation measures the extent to which two factors vary together, they kind of lean on one another. It uncovers naturally occurring relationships. You guys heard of correlation before?
Yeah.
Or correlating? Do we kind of understand what that is? It's basically how two kind of variables have a relationship with one another, and what their relationship is, how strong the relationship is or not. Correlation coefficient, I wouldn't worry about that this year, because we should be going into another class. But yeah, correlation is one you should know. Explains only parts of the variation. It doesn't normally state cause and effect. It doesn't normally state this happens because of this. But it does say this particular variable has this relationship with this particular variable. This thing moves because the other one moves. Right? Yeah, correlation does not prove causation, but it suggests possible cause and effect relationships, but it does not specifically prove it. So remember this principle, and you'll be wiser as you read and hear news of scientific studies. Just because you'll read something that says, oh, well, this changes because of this, it doesn't necessarily prove cause and effect. It doesn't necessarily prove that this happens because of that. It just proves that there may be a relationship between the two. That's important in all walks of life, especially when you're reading things online and on the internet. So, oftentimes take things with a grain of salt that whoever the author is trying to influence you to believe something that may not necessarily be true. Experimentation. Experiments enable researchers to isolate effects of one or more factors. And you manipulate those factors of interest to determine its effect. I was particularly worried about the group part. Do we know what a placebo is? Have we heard the term placebo? What do you think a placebo is?
I don't know exactly what it is, but I heard of it before.
What's that?
I said I don't know exactly what it is, but I heard of it.
You've heard the word placebo, okay.
If you're in an experiment for like drugs and you're trying to see how well it works, you give one of the groups something that doesn't actually do anything, but you tell them that it does and see if their attitude makes a difference or if the drug actually works.
Yeah, absolutely. Placebo could be two groups, right? And they're both told that they're given a certain drug, right? You would expect those people to think it's going to have an effect. But one group, one part of the group, they're given a real drug. The other part of the group, they're given a drug that does nothing. It's not even a drug. Right? It'll be a water pill or something, but it's nothing. And then you see the effects of that. You know, what are the effects? What are actually the psychological effects? Will your mind convince yourself that you're healing, that you're doing better, right? Or will your mind convince yourself otherwise? A lot of times the brain do have a great impact on our bodies, on our physical health. You know, some people can worry themselves into sickness. You know, stress is a big cause for a lot of health issues. And stress is particularly a mental thing, right? Like I'm stressed out. I feel like crap. Why? Stressed out. So your body is doing other things because your mind is making it happen. Independent and dependent variables. Independent variable is an experiment that can be manipulated. Dependent variables, typically you shouldn't manipulate those things. Dependent variable is the outcome that is measured. And it may change when the independent variable is manipulated. I wouldn't particularly worry too much about that right now. I think that's a little bit get into more advanced parts of psychology as opposed to principles. But just know that dependent variable may change when the independent variable is manipulated. Research design, testable questions, picking out a question. Hey, why does this happen because of this? That could be a research question. But it's just something that can actually be tested. Not all things can be tested. Appropriate research design is experimental, right? Correlational, trying to find relationships between things. Case studies, we're just observing one person or one thing. We talked about all these different things. And then you want to measure the behavior or mental process being studied, and then you want to interpret the results. As we talked about last class, bias, right? So even if you have your hypothesis and say, hey, I believe this is going to happen and this happens. That's my hypothesis. And then you do all the research, you get the data shows this, and you're still trying to convince yourself that you were right in the beginning. That happens a lot, right? Because once again, we said we always want to be right. So that is sort of research bias. You really just have to go off the data and say, hey, matter of fact, I was wrong. I was completely wrong. This doesn't happen because of this. The data doesn't show it, you know? So you have to interpret the results based off what the actual outcomes are and not what you want them to be. So to predict everyday behavior, we use experiments to test theoretical principles, resolving principles, rather than finding specific things. We just try to help explain everyday behavior. And come up with a rational explanation. Psychological science focuses less on interpreting specific behaviors rather than on revealing general principles that help explain. So your studies are not the end-all be-all, it's just used to guide an explanation for them. Right? Which is, if you continue your education, you find it out. You're just a contribution to the body of knowledge. Right? So say you want to get a PhD and you do your big study in order to get a PhD, your dissertation. You're just contributing right now. Doesn't mean that what you say holds the same value it does 20 years from now than it did right at that moment you did it. The world changes, the environment, things change. But you want to do your part. Hey, I forgot, so who all wants to get their master's degrees? 1, 2, 3. And everybody else is done. I can get your bachelor's. That's it, huh? That's all you need?
Yes.
And, okay, so there's sort of a trend, right? We could probably observe a trend of saying, hey, this young man back there asked, last class kind of expressed like, hey, does school really matter anymore? Right? Does college matter? Does getting a degree matter? Right? Why should I get a degree? I mean, I can learn everything on YouTube and on Google and Wikipedia and everywhere else. Who has arguments against that? Who says college does matter and why? Yes.
Not everything that you think that you can learn online and stuff like that is like true. Like you can't, like Jaden, that's my friend, but you can't become a physical therapist learning stuff on YouTube. Like you can't like go in and be like, you know what? Hi, I'm applying to become a physical therapist. I studied on YouTube. Like, it's not like, possible.
And that's true, right? Okay, let's say in our society we have, let's say liberal arts degrees, right? So we're just breaking things in classes. And then we'll have something called professional degrees. Typically what a professional degree means is you need to, even after you finish your degree, you need to be licensed.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need to be licensed to be an art history researcher or, curator of a museum or something like that. With certain degrees, you do need to be licensed. So you maybe need to be licensed by a board or licensed by a state. Right? So say if you want to become a lawyer, you need to pass the bar exam in order to get a license from the state to practice in the state. And you have to continue taking exams and paying money, etc., and keeping up in order to keep that license. Else you won't be able to practice. You'll be illegally practicing something that the state says you should not have no business doing. So I'm going to go with a medical degree. Right? I want to be a medical doctor. You have to be licensed by the state. Right? Those are professional degrees. In terms of other degrees, where you say you don't need a license, right? You can get your degree. You gotta find the best job and make all the money you can and move on. What do we think? Is it still value? Or can we just learn everything all on our own online? And we'll have the same sort of outline.
It depends.
What are some of the things that are valuable about showing up to the university? What do we find valuable?
The experience?
Okay, the experience. What all is incorporated in experience? There's some things within the experience itself that's valuable. Yeah.
Making connections.
Connection? Yeah, that would be a big one. You make your network, right? And you may say, hey, I may have learned more from others than I did in the classroom. That could be true. You could be like, hey, man, I learned a lot from the vast amount of people I had access to who were here for the same reason as me, right? But they were in other fields or other ideas or just different people. They shared a lot more things that helped me see some things different, right? Or put me in a position on the road for success. And at major big universities, that's typically true. So you take, for example, let's just say Harvard, right? Even if you didn't have money, right, you're just smart. You show up to Harvard as a poor individual, but just smart. You show up to Harvard, and it may not be necessarily be, hey, the classrooms and the lectures and all of that, but you may have been roommates with a senator's son, right? Someone who run a hedge fund, a guy who's in his dorm room starting a business called Facebook in his dorm room. That might have been your buddy. You networked, you learned from him, and now you're worth $30, $40 billion because he put you on to the business. The point is, it's all subjective, right? Going back to psychology, it's all your perspective from where you stand. We all can't stand in the same place at the same time. That is impossible. For two people to be in the same place at the exact same time. Can't be in the same place. So your perspective on everything is always different, even to the person standing next to you or sitting. Right? So, what's the answer? There is no answer. The answer is your answer. That's the truth. That's your answer. Right? What's good for somebody is not great for others. What's great for somebody is not good for others. That's that. What time is it? 2:50. Okay. All right, everyone. No class on Monday.
This presentation was brought to you by the Zach Ross Foundation, a global philanthropic organization focusing on poverty, education, and mental health. We hope you've enjoyed.